In the early 1900s, a terrifying disease was sweeping across the American South, and no one knew what was causing it. It started quietly. A strange rash would appear on a person's hands and neck, red and raw, blistering wherever the skin met the sun. Then came the stomach trouble, endless and draining. And then, in the worst cases, the mind itself began to unravel. Confusion, memory loss, madness. Doctors came to know it by 4 grim words that each began with the same letter: dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and death. They called it pellagra, and it was everywhere. In just one state, South Carolina, a single year brought around 30,000 cases, and nearly half of those people died. For a time, pellagra was one of the leading causes of death in the region. Across the American South, over a few decades, it struck an estimated 3 million people and killed around 100,000 of them. Doctors were baffled and afraid. Most were convinced it had to be a germ, some invisible infection spreading from person to person the way so many deadly diseases did. They were wrong. The killer was not a germ at all. The killer was food. Specifically, it was one of the most common, most beloved, and most important foods on the entire planet. The killer was corn. Or rather, it was corn eaten the wrong way. Because hidden inside the story of pellagra is one of the strangest and most tragic secrets in the history of food. A secret that ancient people had solved thousands of years earlier and that the modern world had simply thrown away. To understand how the crop that feeds billions became a silent killer, we have to go back, not a few centuries, nearly 10,000 years, to a river valley in Mexico, and to a plant so strange that, by all rights, it should not exist at all. This is the history of corn. Our story begins around 9,000 years ago, in the Balsas River Valley of southern Mexico. But if you traveled back to that valley, you would not find fields of tall golden corn. You would find a scraggly, unremarkable wild grass called teosinte. Teosinte looked nothing like the corn we know. Instead of a fat cob wrapped in husks, it produced a tiny spike, smaller than your little finger, holding just a handful of hard, stony kernels. And each of those kernels was locked inside a shell so tough you could break a tooth on it. It was, frankly, barely food at all. If you found teosinte growing wild today, you would probably walk right past it. And yet, the ancient people of this valley saw something in it. Some believe they were first drawn not to the grain at all, but to the sweet juice inside the stalk, which could be chewed or even fermented. Over countless generations, these early farmers began doing something quietly revolutionary. They saved the seeds from the best plants, the ones with slightly more kernels, the ones with a slightly softer shell, and they planted those again and again, year after year, century after century. The result was one of the most dramatic transformations any living thing has ever undergone at human hands. Slowly, teosinte's tiny spike swelled into a full cob. Its handful of stony seeds multiplied into hundreds of soft, edible kernels. The rock-hard shell melted away. A useless wild grass had been sculpted by patient human hands into corn. And here is the astonishing part. In the process, humans changed corn so completely that it can no longer survive without us. A cob of corn cannot spread its own seeds. The kernels are packed tightly together and wrapped in a husk, so if a cob simply fell to the ground, the seeds would sprout in a suffocating clump and choke each other out. Corn cannot reproduce in the wild. It depends entirely on human hands to plant it, every single time. In fact, corn is so unlike any wild plant that for a long time, scientists could not even agree on where it had come from. Its nearest wild relative, teosinte, looked so completely different, that hard little spike against a fat golden cob, that many researchers flatly refused to believe the two could be related at all. The debate raged for decades. It was only much later, when scientists learned to read the genetic code of both plants, that the argument was finally settled. That scraggly grass really was the ancestor. Ancient farmers, armed with nothing but patience and a sharp eye, had pulled off one of the most astonishing feats of genetic engineering in all of human history, thousands of years before anyone knew what a gene even was. Corn is, in a very real sense, the most man-made living thing on Earth. We made corn, and corn, in turn, would help make us. Because as this new crop spread across ancient Mexico and Central America, it became the foundation of everything. Corn was reliable. It could be dried and stored for years. It could feed a village, then a city, then an empire. On the back of corn rose some of the greatest civilizations of the ancient Americas: the Olmec, the Maya, the Aztec. Their temples, their cities, their calendars, their armies, all of it was fueled by this one golden grain. To feed cities of tens of thousands of people, these civilizations built astonishing systems of farming. The Aztecs grew corn on floating garden islands called chinampas, raised up from the mud of the lakes around their capital, some of the most productive farmland the world had ever seen. Corn filled their markets and their storehouses. It was demanded as tribute from conquered peoples, flowing into the capital by the ton. Priests tracked the planting and the harvest with elaborate calendars. There were gods and goddesses of maize, honored with festivals and offerings because the people understood a simple and terrifying truth. If the corn failed, everyone died. Their entire world balanced on the success of this single plant. Corn was not just food to these peoples, it was sacred. It was life itself. The Maya told a creation story written down in a sacred book called the Popol Vuh, in which the gods tried again and again to create human beings. First, they made people out of mud, but the mud people fell apart. Then they carved people out of wood, but the wood people had no hearts and no memory. And then, at last, the gods found the right material. They ground white and yellow corn, and from that corn dough, they shaped the flesh of the first true humans. In the Maya story, we are not people who eat corn. We are people who are made of corn. The ancient farmers of the Americas were not simply growing corn on its own either. They had discovered a kind of agricultural genius that we now call the Three Sisters. They planted corn, beans, and squash together in the very same mound of earth, and each plant helped the others survive. The tall cornstalk gave the climbing beans something to grow up. The beans pulled nitrogen out of the air and fed it back into the soil, keeping the ground rich for the hungry corn. And the broad squash leaves spread across the ground below, shading out weeds and locking moisture into the earth. Three crops working as one living system. But the Three Sisters did something even cleverer, something the people themselves may not have fully understood. Corn, eaten on its own, is missing certain building blocks the human body needs. Beans happen to contain almost exactly what corn lacks. Eaten together, corn and beans form a complete and nourishing meal, each one quietly covering the other's weakness. So the people of the Americas were protected twice over. Once by the beans they planted beside their corn, and once by the way they prepared the corn itself. But the ancient Mesoamericans did something else with corn, something that seemed small and turned out to be a matter of life and death. They discovered that if you soaked and cooked the dried corn kernels in water mixed with an alkali, usually lime made from crushed shells or ash from the fire, something magical happened. The tough skins loosened and slipped away. The corn became softer, easier to grind into a smooth dough for tortillas and tamales. It tasted better. It lasted longer. This process has a name today: nixtamalization. Now here is the part almost no one knows, and it is the heart of our whole story. That alkali treatment did not just make the corn tastier. It quietly unlocked a vitamin hidden inside the corn, a vitamin called niacin. In raw, untreated corn, that niacin is locked away in a form the human body cannot absorb. Soaking the corn in lime releases it and makes it available to nourish the body. The ancient peoples of Mexico had no idea what a vitamin was. They knew nothing of niacin or nutrition. But by treating their corn this way, generation after generation, they had accidentally protected themselves from a disease they did not even know existed. A disease that would one day be called pellagra. They had the recipe. They had the cure baked right into their daily bread. And then the rest of the world took the corn and left the recipe behind. The great change came in the year 1492 when Columbus reached the Americas and encountered this strange golden grain. Corn was one of the many treasures carried back across the ocean in what we now call the Columbian Exchange, the vast swapping of plants, animals, and diseases between the New World and the Old. And corn conquered the Old World almost instantly. It was a miracle crop. It grew in places where wheat struggled. It produced enormous amounts of food from a single seed. It thrived in the heat of Africa, in the hills of southern Europe, in the fields of China and the Ottoman Empire. Within a couple of centuries, corn was feeding people on nearly every continent. In northern Italy, it became polenta. In Africa, it became a staple that would eventually feed hundreds of millions. Corn spread faster and farther than almost any crop in history. In much of southern and eastern Africa, corn became more than just a crop. It became life itself, the daily bread of entire nations, ground into a thick porridge and eaten at nearly every meal. Whole populations came to depend on this New World grain so completely that a single failed corn harvest could tip a region into famine. A plant that had been unknown outside the Americas just a few centuries earlier was now the razor-thin line between survival and starvation for hundreds of millions of people. Corn had traveled from a quiet valley in Mexico to the beating heart of the entire world's food supply. But in all that spreading, one thing was left behind: the lime, the soaking, the ancient recipe. The people of the Old World saw the corn, and they grew it, and they ate it. But no one had told them the crucial secret. No one explained that corn had to be treated with alkali to be truly safe as a staple food. Why would they? To a European farmer, you just grind the grain and eat it, the way you always had with wheat. And so, slowly, the killer awoke. Wherever people became poor enough to live on corn and little else, eating it plain, day after day, without meat or vegetables and without that ancient lime treatment, pellagra appeared. It struck first in the corn-eating regions of Europe, in Italy and Spain, as early as the 1700s. Then, centuries later, it crossed the ocean and exploded across the American South, where poor sharecroppers and mill workers survived on a diet of cornmeal, fatback, and molasses, and slowly wasted away from a vitamin their food was quietly denying them. For years, doctors chased the wrong answer, convinced that pellagra was contagious. It took a stubborn public health doctor named Joseph Goldberger to prove them all wrong. Starting in the 1910s, Goldberger noticed something that the germ theory simply could not explain. In the orphanages and asylums where pellagra raged, the inmates fell ill in huge numbers, but the staff who worked beside them every single day, breathing the same air and touching the same surfaces, almost never caught it. The one real difference between them was the food on their plates. The staff ate meat and milk, the inmates ate corn. To prove his case, Goldberger ran a bold and startling experiment. He took a group of healthy prison volunteers who were promised pardons in exchange and fed them a diet heavy in corn and little else. Within months, these previously healthy men broke out in pellagra. Then he reversed it, curing sick orphans and inmates simply by feeding them better, more varied food. And still, many doctors refused to believe him. So Goldberger did something almost unthinkable. To prove once and for all that pellagra could not be caught, he and his volunteers, including his own wife, deliberately swallowed and injected themselves with the blood, the skin, and the waste of pellagra patients. If the disease were truly contagious, they would surely fall gravely ill. Not one of them did. Even then, the powerful were slow to listen. Many in the South did not want to admit that the disease was really a disease of poverty, of people who could afford nothing but corn. It was not until 1937 that scientists finally identified the missing piece as niacin. the very vitamin that ancient nixtamalization had been unlocking all along. Once bread and cornmeal were enriched with added vitamins, pellagra all but vanished from the United States, as if it had never existed. 2 centuries of suffering and death, millions of cases, all because the world had copied a crop, but not the recipe that made it safe. The Maya had solved the problem before the pyramids of Giza were even old, and the modern world simply had not been paying attention. But corn's story does not end there. Because in the modern age, corn did not just survive, it quietly took over the world. That takeover began in earnest in the early 20th century with a quiet revolution in the American Midwest. For generations, farmers had simply saved seed from their best plants, much the same way humans had done since the days of teosinte. Corn yields had barely improved in decades. Then, a young Iowan named Henry Wallace became obsessed with a new idea. By carefully crossing different lines of corn, you could create hybrid seed, plants far more productive than either parent. In 1926, he founded a company to sell that hybrid seed, a company that would grow into a giant of American agriculture. Wallace himself would go on to become the Secretary of Agriculture and later the Vice President of the United States. The results were staggering. For decades, American farmers had pulled around 25 bushels of corn from an acre of land. Hybrid seed, combined with machines and fertilizers, sent that number climbing and climbing. Today, that same single acre can produce 200 bushels or more, roughly 8 times as much corn from the very same ground. America began growing an ocean of corn, far more than its own people could ever eat. And that flood of cheap, surplus corn changed everything. It had to go somewhere, so corn was pushed into animal feed on an industrial scale and refined into sweeteners, starches, and fuels. The mountain of corn created by that yield revolution is the reason corn quietly seeped into almost every corner of modern life. But this new, uniform, industrial corn carried a hidden danger, and in 1970, that danger nearly caused a catastrophe. To mass-produce hybrid seed, the industry had come to rely on a single genetic shortcut, one that was used in around 85% of all the corn grown in the United States. It made the seed easy and cheap to produce. It also made almost the entire national crop genetically identical in one crucial way. And then a new strain of fungus appeared that was perfectly suited to attack exactly that weakness. It was called southern corn leaf blight, and in the warm, humid summer of 1970, it tore through the American corn belt. Starting in the south, it swept north all the way to Minnesota and Maine, blackening the leaves and rotting the ears. By the time it burned out, the blight had wiped out around 1/6 of the entire United States corn crop in a single season. Illinois alone lost hundreds of millions of bushels. The damage ran into the billions. It was the lesson of the Irish potato famine all over again, this time written in corn. When a whole nation leans on one crop and that crop is bred to be nearly identical everywhere, a single well-aimed disease can bring the entire thing crashing down. The industry learned fast and abandoned the vulnerable seed, and within a year, the blight faded away. But it was a chilling reminder. The very uniformity that made corn so cheap and so abundant had also made it dangerously fragile. We had built a huge share of our food supply on a plant that could, in the wrong summer, come close to wiping itself out. Today, corn is the single most produced grain on the entire planet, grown in staggering quantities, especially across the vast fields of the United States, which grows more corn than any other country on Earth. But here is the strange twist, the part that would astonish those ancient Mexican farmers who first coaxed it out of a wild grass. Most of that corn is never eaten as corn at all. Look at a mountain of American corn, and only a small slice of it ends up on a dinner plate as something you would recognize. The vast majority goes somewhere else. A huge share is fed to animals, to the cattle, pigs, and chickens that become our meat, our milk, and our eggs. Another enormous portion is turned into fuel, into ethanol that is burned in car engines. And much of the rest is broken down in factories, and rebuilt into ingredients that hide invisibly inside the food all around you. Corn becomes high-fructose corn syrup, the sweetener in countless sodas, candies, and sauces. It becomes cornstarch and corn oil, and a long list of additives with unfamiliar names that appear on the back of thousands of packages. It thickens your soup, it sweetens your drink, it coats your fried food. It is in your bread, your cereal, your salad dressing, and even in things that are not food at all, like some plastics and glues. To picture just how deep this goes, follow a single fast food meal. The beef in the burger came from a cow fattened on corn in a feedlot. The bun was sweetened with corn syrup. The chicken pieces were raised on corn, bound together with cornstarch and fried in corn oil. The soda beside it is essentially corn, dissolved into fizzy water. Even the wrapping may contain corn-based materials. A meal that seems to have nothing to do with corn is, underneath it all, almost entirely built from it. And none of this happened by accident. Governments, especially in the United States, have spent decades supporting and subsidizing corn, keeping it cheap and endlessly abundant, which pushed food companies to invent more and more clever ways to use the overflowing supply. The result is a food system quietly rebuilt around a single crop. We did not sit down as a society and decide to eat this much corn. It simply became the cheapest thing to put inside almost everything, and so, slowly and invisibly, it did. Corn has become so woven into the modern diet, especially in America, that scientists have found something almost unbelievable. When researchers study the chemistry of the carbon inside people's bodies, the carbon that literally builds our flesh, they can trace where it came from. And in many modern Americans, an enormous share of that carbon can be traced back to a single source: corn. In a very real chemical sense, the Maya were right. We are people made of corn. We just did not choose it on purpose, and most of us never even noticed. So think about the whole journey. A scraggly wild grass in a Mexican river valley, with a handful of stony seeds, so useless you would step right over it. Reshaped by thousands of years of patient human hands into a golden crop that fed empires and became a god. Carried across the ocean to conquer the world, while its life-saving secret was left behind, unleashing a plague that killed for 2 centuries. And finally, transformed into the invisible foundation of the modern food supply, hiding inside almost everything we eat, feeding our animals, fueling our cars, and quietly building our very bodies. It is one of the most extraordinary stories any plant has ever written. And the strangest part is how little we think about it. You almost certainly ate corn today. Maybe you never saw a single yellow kernel. It was in the sweetener in your drink, in the feed that raised your meat, in the starch that thickened your meal, hidden under a dozen different names. A plant that cannot even survive without us has quietly made itself impossible for us to live without. The next time you pass a field of corn standing tall in the sun, remember what you are really looking at. Not just a crop, a partner, a survivor, and one of the great quiet powers shaping the modern world, sitting right there in plain sight. If this story surprised you, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories behind the everyday things all around you. Drop a like if you learned something new, and leave a comment telling me which part of corn's story surprised you the most. There is a lot more history still growing.